What began as a routine medical consultation quickly escalated into something far more serious. Behind closed palace doors, Catherine's medical team delivered a message so urgent that even senior royal aides were caught off guard. Within hours, whispers spread through royal circles, and one name kept surfacing in conversations no one expected: Camilla. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For a family that has spent generations mastering the art of silence, the sudden wave of concern surrounding Princess Catherine was impossible to ignore. Reports suggest that what was initially scheduled as a standard review of her ongoing recovery quickly evolved into a far more intense discussion involving senior medical advisors and key palace officials. While no official statement revealed the details of that meeting, insiders began noticing subtle changes almost immediately. Engagements that had reportedly been under consideration were quietly reevaluated. Conversations that normally flowed freely among palace staff became noticeably restrained. Even among veteran royal watchers, there was a growing sense that something unusual was unfolding behind the scenes. The timing could hardly have been more sensitive. Catherine had already spent months navigating one of the most challenging periods of her public life, balancing recovery with the enormous expectations that come with being the future queen. Throughout that journey, she had become a symbol of resilience, earning admiration from supporters across the United Kingdom and beyond. Yet, according to sources familiar with palace operations, concerns had begun to emerge about the mounting pressures surrounding her recovery. What should have been a period focused entirely on health and healing was reportedly becoming increasingly complicated by tensions within royal circles, raising questions about whether outside factors were beginning to take a toll. As word of the medical update quietly circulated among palace staff, another unusual development reportedly occurred. Senior aides who would ordinarily handle scheduling and communications were said to have been placed on heightened alert. Several individuals familiar with royal protocol allegedly described an atmosphere of extreme caution. Information was being shared on a strictly need-to-know basis. Conversations became guarded. Long-standing palace traditions of openness among internal teams appeared to tighten almost overnight. While such measures are not entirely unheard of during sensitive situations, observers noted that the level of secrecy surrounding this particular development felt markedly different. What made the situation even more intriguing was the growing belief among royal insiders that the concerns extended beyond Catherine's physical recovery alone. Reports suggest that doctors were paying close attention, not only to medical indicators, but also to the broader environment surrounding the Princess of Wales. Stress, uncertainty, and ongoing internal pressures were increasingly being discussed as factors that could not simply be ignored. While no one publicly questioned Catherine's strength, there were whispers that even the strongest members of the royal family have limits, and that those limits may have become a subject of serious concern during the private consultations. Meanwhile, royal commentators began noticing small but telling signs. Planned appearances remained uncertain. Public messaging became unusually measured. Palace representatives offered little beyond carefully worded reassurances. To the outside world, everything appeared calm, but within royal circles, speculation continued to grow. Why had such extraordinary precautions suddenly been introduced? Why were trusted aides remaining unusually silent? And perhaps most importantly, why did discussions about Catherine's situation repeatedly intersect with reports of growing disagreements behind palace walls? The answers remained frustratingly elusive. Yet as more fragments of information emerged, attention slowly shifted away from the medical update itself and toward the circumstances surrounding it. Because, according to several accounts, concerns about Catherine's well-being were becoming intertwined with a deeper issue, one involving influence, authority, and a series of disagreements that had reportedly been simmering beneath the surface for far longer than anyone realized. And as palace insiders began connecting those dots, a much larger story started to take shape. But the doctor's warning was only part of the story. Attention soon shifted to events occurring behind the scenes and to a disagreement that had been building for months. For months, subtle signs hinted that all was not well inside the royal household. Public smiles concealed private disagreements, and what appeared to be routine palace business may have masked a growing power struggle. As questions surrounding Catherine's health continued to circulate, attention gradually shifted toward an uncomfortable reality that many royal observers had been quietly discussing for some time. Long before reports of urgent medical consultations began making headlines, there had already been whispers of competing priorities within the royal establishment. On the surface, the monarchy projected unity, stability, and continuity. Behind that carefully maintained image, however, reports suggest that different factions were increasingly focused on very different objectives. Some were concerned with preserving tradition. Others were focused on maintaining influence. And at the center of it all stood Catherine, whose primary concern appeared far simpler than any palace strategy: her recovery and the well-being of her family. According to sources familiar with the mood inside royal circles, Catherine had become increasingly determined to place her health and children ahead of public expectations. After enduring months of intense scrutiny, she reportedly viewed recovery not as a temporary pause, but as a necessity. Yet that approach may not have aligned perfectly with every expectation surrounding the future Princess of Wales. Insiders have long suggested that competing views existed regarding how quickly she should resume public responsibilities and how visible she should remain during a period when the monarchy itself was facing significant challenges. While no official disagreements were ever acknowledged, the contrast between personal priorities and institutional demands was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. What made the situation particularly delicate was the broader context in which these tensions were unfolding. King Charles was already navigating his own health concerns, creating uncertainty about the future direction of the monarchy. Prince William found himself balancing unprecedented responsibilities while simultaneously supporting his wife through one of the most difficult chapters of her life. Every decision suddenly carried greater significance. Every public appearance was analyzed. Every absence sparked speculation. And as pressure mounted, even routine discussions reportedly became sources of disagreement among those tasked with guiding the institution forward. Courtiers, according to several royal commentators, were increasingly forced into the role of mediators. Their task was not simply managing schedules or coordinating engagements. Instead, they were allegedly attempting to navigate a growing divide between competing expectations. Some believed stability required a stronger public presence from senior royals. Others reportedly argued that Catherine's recovery had to remain the absolute priority, regardless of external pressures. As these debates unfolded behind closed doors, aides worked tirelessly to prevent private disagreements from spilling into public view. Yet the more they attempted to contain the narrative, the more speculation seemed to grow. Media attention only intensified the situation. Royal correspondents began noticing inconsistencies in palace messaging. Commentators who had spent years covering the monarchy sensed that something deeper was unfolding beneath the carefully crafted statements. Questions multiplied. Why were certain plans repeatedly being adjusted? Why did palace briefings appear increasingly cautious? And why were rumors of internal disagreements becoming more persistent with each passing week? Although definitive answers remained elusive, the atmosphere surrounding the royal household was undeniably changing. No one felt that pressure more than William. As future king, he was expected to project confidence and stability. As a husband and father, he was focused on protecting his family during an extraordinarily difficult period. Those dual responsibilities placed him in an increasingly challenging position. Reports suggest that every major decision was now being viewed through two lenses: what was best for the institution and what was best for Catherine. The difficulty was that those objectives did not always appear perfectly aligned. And as competing expectations continued to collide behind palace walls, the strain became harder to dismiss. By this stage, what had initially appeared to be isolated concerns were beginning to form a larger pattern. Conversations once dismissed as speculation were now being revisited with renewed interest. Timelines were being examined. Decisions were being scrutinized. Relationships were being reassessed. And as palace insiders pieced together the timeline, a surprising detail emerged, one involving decisions that allegedly affected Catherine directly. Then came the claims that changed everything. What had been palace gossip suddenly became a major talking point among royal watchers, raising questions about influence, authority, and timing. For weeks, rumors had circulated quietly through royal circles, dismissed by some as nothing more than speculation, and amplified by others as evidence of a deeper struggle unfolding behind palace walls. But as more details began emerging from individuals claiming knowledge of internal discussions, the conversation shifted dramatically. What had once been whispered among commentators and insiders suddenly became impossible to ignore. Reports began suggesting that certain decisions surrounding Catherine's schedule, recovery, and public role may not have been as straightforward as they appeared. The allegations were vague, often contradictory, and impossible to verify independently, yet they carried enough weight to ignite a firestorm of debate. At the center of the controversy were growing claims of interference. Not everyone agreed on what that word actually meant. Some interpreted it as simple differences of opinion within a complex institution. Others viewed it as evidence that influential figures were attempting to shape decisions during one of the most sensitive periods of Catherine's life. The lack of clarity only fueled the intrigue. Every new report seemed to raise more questions than answers. Who was influencing whom? What conversations had taken place behind closed doors? And why did so many accounts point toward disagreements that extended far beyond ordinary palace administration? The deeper journalists and commentators dug, the more fragmented the story became. Sources familiar with royal operations reportedly offered conflicting versions of events. Some insisted there had been no significant dispute at all, merely routine discussions that had been exaggerated by media speculation. Others suggested the situation was far more complicated, describing tensions over priorities, timing, and the future direction of key royal responsibilities. The result was a landscape filled with competing narratives, each presenting a different version of what had allegedly occurred. Yet despite those contradictions, one theme appeared repeatedly. Questions surrounding Catherine's recovery plans had become intertwined with broader discussions about royal expectations. According to various reports, there were differing views on how quickly normal duties should resume, and how the monarchy should navigate a period marked by both personal health challenges and institutional uncertainty. For Catherine, whose focus reportedly remained centered on healing and family, the situation was becoming increasingly difficult. What should have been a straightforward path toward recovery now appeared overshadowed by debates she may never have expected to face. As public interest intensified, the story quickly expanded beyond royal commentators and dedicated monarchy watchers. Headlines multiplied. Social media discussions exploded. Every new claim generated fresh theories, while every palace silence created additional speculation. The controversy had evolved into something much larger than a simple disagreement. It was now a story about influence, power, and the delicate balance between personal well-being and public duty. The more attention it received, the harder it became for anyone involved to escape the growing scrutiny. Perhaps most revealing was the palace's response, or lack of one. While official statements continued emphasizing Catherine's recovery and thanking the public for their support, detailed questions about the allegations received little clarification. Requests for comment were met with carefully measured responses. No direct explanations emerged. No comprehensive timeline was offered. For supporters seeking certainty, the silence proved frustrating. For critics and skeptics, it became yet another source of suspicion. And for royal observers attempting to separate fact from rumor, it created an information vacuum that speculation eagerly rushed to fill. As the debate intensified, the focus slowly began shifting once again. The question was no longer limited to whether influence had been exerted or whether disagreements had occurred. a far more significant concern was beginning to emerge. Because if these tensions had indeed shaped decisions during such a critical period, what impact had they ultimately produced? What consequences had followed those private discussions, those conflicting priorities, and those alleged interventions? The answers, according to those closest to the unfolding situation, would prove even more consequential than the allegations themselves. Yet the controversy wasn't only about influence, it was about the consequences that followed. As speculation intensified, Prince William reportedly adopted a far more protective stance. Those closest to the family noticed a clear shift in priorities. The controversy surrounding Catherine's recovery may have generated endless headlines, but behind all the public discussion was a far more personal reality unfolding within the Wales household. As competing narratives continued to dominate royal commentary, reports increasingly suggested that Prince William had become determined to focus on one thing above all else: his family. Those familiar with the situation described a noticeable change in approach. The future king, long regarded as someone deeply committed to duty, now appeared equally committed to drawing a firm line between public expectations and private well-being. And for many observers, that shift spoke volumes. For years, William had balanced the enormous responsibilities that come with his position while maintaining an image of stability and composure. Yet this chapter presented a challenge unlike any he had faced before. Catherine was not simply a senior royal navigating a difficult period. She was his wife, the mother of his children, and the person who had stood beside him through some of the monarchy's most turbulent years. According to reports, that reality increasingly shaped every decision being made behind closed doors. Palace obligations remained important, but protecting Catherine's recovery appeared to have become the overriding priority. Royal insiders began pointing to subtle but significant developments. Public engagements were reportedly being assessed with greater caution. Certain commitments appeared to be delayed or adjusted. Discussions about future appearances became increasingly measured. While palace officials framed these decisions as entirely reasonable given the circumstances, many observers interpreted them as evidence of a broader strategy. William, they believed, was ensuring that Catherine would not be pushed into situations that could jeopardize her recovery simply to satisfy public expectations or institutional pressures. That protective instinct reportedly extended beyond Catherine herself. The couple's children increasingly became a central consideration in discussions surrounding the family's public life. George, Charlotte, and Louis had already spent much of their lives under extraordinary scrutiny, but reports suggest William was particularly determined to shield them from the emotional strain accompanying the relentless speculation. Those close to royal operations claimed efforts were being made to preserve as much normality as possible during an otherwise uncertain period. Family routines reportedly took precedence. Public exposure was carefully considered. The focus, according to various accounts, remained firmly on creating stability for the children while wider controversies continued unfolding around them. The contrast was striking. On one side stood the relentless demands of royal life, a system built upon visibility, public duty, and constant attention. On the other stood a family facing deeply personal challenges while attempting to navigate an increasingly intense spotlight. For William, the balancing act became more difficult with every passing week. Every decision was scrutinized. Every absence generated speculation. Every gesture was interpreted through the lens of the growing controversy. Yet, despite the pressure, reports consistently suggested that his position remained unchanged. Family came first. As that perception spread, public sympathy appeared to grow as well. Supporters who had followed Catherine's journey expressed increasing concern about the challenges she was facing. Discussions that once focused on palace politics began shifting toward questions of well-being and compassion. Many viewed William's reported actions not as a rejection of duty, but as an affirmation of it, a recognition that leadership sometimes requires protecting those closest to you before addressing the expectations of everyone else. Yet, even as public support continued building around the Wales family, the situation inside royal circles remained far from settled. The speculation had become too widespread to ignore. The competing accounts had generated too much interest, and the longer definitive answers failed to emerge, the more difficult it became to contain the growing wave of questions. Because while William focused on safeguarding his family from the turmoil, another battle was quietly taking shape elsewhere, one involving perception, messaging, and the increasingly fragile effort to maintain control of a rapidly evolving story. But while William focused on family, the palace faced an increasingly difficult challenge: controlling the narrative. The palace understood the stakes. Every statement, every appearance, and every silence suddenly carried enormous significance. By this point, the situation had evolved far beyond questions surrounding Catherine's recovery. What began as concern over a senior royal's health had transformed into a complex public narrative involving speculation, competing interpretations, and growing scrutiny from every direction. Palace officials were acutely aware of the challenge before them. They were no longer simply managing schedules or coordinating public engagements. They were attempting to navigate an environment where every decision was examined, every word was dissected, and every omission generated a new wave of theories. According to royal commentators, communications became increasingly deliberate. Statements were carefully crafted, often revealing just enough information to reassure the public while avoiding details that could trigger further speculation. The balancing act was extraordinarily difficult. Too much information risked fueling controversy. Too little information risked creating an information vacuum. And in an age where rumors can travel across the world within minutes, maintaining that balance became one of the palace's greatest challenges. Supporters hoping for clarity often found themselves frustrated by the limited updates. Official communications consistently emphasized Catherine's progress and thanked the public for its continued support, but they rarely addressed the broader questions dominating headlines. The absence of detailed explanations allowed speculation to thrive. Every carefully worded statement became a subject of analysis. Every public appearance was scrutinized for hidden meaning. Even routine decisions began attracting extraordinary attention as observers searched for clues about what was truly happening behind palace walls. At the same time, palace aides reportedly worked tirelessly to calm the growing storm. Their objective was straightforward: maintain stability, reassure the public, and prevent speculation from overshadowing the institution itself. Yet, achieving those goals proved far more complicated than anticipated. The more they attempted to redirect attention toward official messaging, the more determined commentators became to investigate these stories circulating beneath the surface. It was a cycle that seemed impossible to break. Efforts to restore calm often generated new questions rather than answers. Meanwhile, media scrutiny reached levels that few could have predicted at the beginning of the controversy. Newspapers, television commentators, podcast hosts, and social media personalities all focused intensely on developments within the royal household. Every new report was examined through multiple lenses. Some accounts portrayed the situation as an entirely understandable response to a difficult period. Others suggested deeper tensions were influencing decisions behind the scenes. The result was a constant stream of conflicting narratives that left the public struggling to determine what should be believed. Those contradictions only heightened the sense of uncertainty. One source would dismiss allegations as exaggerated speculation. Another would suggest significant disagreements had occurred. One commentator would argue that the palace remained firmly in control. Another would insist that internal divisions were becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. As these competing interpretations collided in the public sphere, confusion grew. Yet despite the uncertainty, one reality remained undeniable. Concern for Catherine continued to intensify. The public response revealed just how deeply invested people had become in her well-being. Messages of support poured in from across the world. Conversations that once focused on palace politics increasingly centered on empathy and concern. Many supporters saw Catherine not as a royal figure embroiled in controversy, but as a wife and mother navigating extraordinary circumstances. That emotional connection ensured that interest in the story remained remarkably strong, even as definitive answers remained elusive. For palace officials, this created an impossible dilemma. The demand for information continued growing, yet every attempt to address the situation risked generating further debate. The controversy had become self-sustaining. Questions led to speculation. Speculation led to scrutiny. Scrutiny produced conflicting reports, and those conflicting reports inspired even more questions. It was a cycle that showed little sign of ending. Just when it seemed the story might gradually fade from public attention, something unexpected happened. New accounts began surfacing from individuals claiming knowledge of internal discussions. Their claims challenged existing narratives, revived old debates, and introduced fresh uncertainties into a controversy many believed was finally beginning to settle. Then a fresh wave of insider accounts reignited questions that many believed had already been settled. Just when the controversy appeared to be fading, new insider claims reopened the debate and pushed the story back into headlines. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the storm surrounding Catherine and the palace might finally be settling. Public attention had begun drifting toward other royal matters. Commentators were running out of fresh details to analyze, and official messaging appeared to be regaining some control over the narrative. Yet beneath that fragile calm, new accounts were quietly emerging. What made them particularly significant was not necessarily what they claimed, but where they allegedly came from. Individuals described as being familiar with palace operations began offering fresh perspectives on events that many believed had already been explained, and almost overnight, questions that seemed destined to fade away came roaring back. According to these accounts, conversations taking place behind closed doors may have been more complicated than previously understood. Some sources suggested that internal discussions regarding Catherine's recovery, public role, and future responsibilities had involved greater disagreement than initially acknowledged. Others disputed those claims entirely, arguing that ordinary differences of opinion were being exaggerated into something far more dramatic. As had happened throughout the controversy, certainty remained elusive. Yet the sheer existence of new accounts was enough to reignite public curiosity and place renewed pressure on everyone involved. What made these developments particularly compelling was the way they challenged existing assumptions. For months, observers had attempted to piece together a coherent explanation for the conflicting reports surrounding Catherine's situation. Some concluded the story had been overstated from the beginning. Others believed important details remained hidden from public view. The new insider claims seemed to offer support for both perspectives simultaneously. They revealed just enough information to keep speculation alive while withholding enough detail to ensure that no definitive conclusion could be reached. The result was a mystery that appeared more complicated than ever. Royal commentators quickly seized upon the developments. Analysts who had followed the story from the beginning returned to earlier reports, searching for overlooked details and connections. Long-forgotten statements were revisited. Timelines were re-examined. Previous assumptions were challenged. The controversy entered a new phase, one driven not by fresh events, but by fresh interpretations of events that had already occurred. In many ways, that made the situation even more difficult to navigate. Facts could be debated. Interpretations could be endless. Amid the renewed attention, focus inevitably returned to Catherine herself. Regardless of where people stood on the various claims, one issue remained at the center of every discussion: her well-being. Supporters expressed concern that the ongoing speculation risked overshadowing the very thing that mattered most: her continued recovery. The irony was difficult to ignore. The controversy had started with questions about her health. Yet the debate had gradually expanded into a broader examination of palace dynamics, influence, and internal decision-making. Now, as new accounts emerged, public sympathy for Catherine appeared stronger than ever. At the same time, questions surrounding the inner workings of the monarchy continued to grow. How were major decisions being made during such a sensitive period? Who held influence over those decisions? Were disagreements being managed effectively, or were they contributing to the confusion that had surrounded the story from the start? These questions extended beyond any individual claim. They touched upon larger issues concerning transparency, leadership, and the balance between private family matters and public institutional responsibilities. The renewed debate also revealed something important about public perception. While commentators argued over competing narratives, many people increasingly viewed Catherine as someone caught in circumstances beyond her control. Each new headline seemed to reinforce that impression. The more complicated the controversy became, the more sympathy appeared to gravitate toward her. Supporters who had followed every development grew increasingly protective, convinced that the human side of the story should not be lost amid endless speculation. Yet, even as fresh claims continued generating headlines and public interest remained intense, a larger question was beginning to emerge from beneath the controversy. Because this was no longer simply a story about one royal, one disagreement, or one difficult period. The issues being raised touched upon something far broader, something with implications that could extend far beyond the current moment and shape how the monarchy itself would be viewed in the years ahead. But beyond the headlines lay a larger issue, one that could shape the monarchy's future. What began as a health concern had evolved into a broader conversation about leadership, trust, and the future direction of the royal family. By now, the discussion had expanded far beyond the original reports that first captured public attention. Questions about Catherine's recovery had gradually transformed into something much larger, a reflection of the challenges facing a monarchy attempting to navigate one of the most delicate periods in recent memory. The controversy had become a lens through which people examined not only the actions of individual royals, but also the institution itself. Every development seemed to raise deeper questions about leadership, responsibility, and the qualities that would define the next generation of the crown. At the center of that conversation stood Catherine. Over the years, she had become one of the monarchy's most trusted and admired figures, earning respect through consistency, composure, and a reputation for placing duty above personal attention. Yet the events of recent months revealed a different side of her role within the royal family. Rather than being viewed solely as a future queen, she increasingly became a symbol of resilience during a period marked by uncertainty. For many supporters, the challenges she faced highlighted the extraordinary pressures attached to royal life. The admiration she received was no longer based only on public appearances or official engagements. It stemmed from the belief that she was enduring a difficult chapter with quiet determination despite relentless scrutiny. At the same time, the spotlight naturally shifted toward William and the responsibilities awaiting him in the years ahead. The future king had long prepared for leadership, but preparation and reality are rarely the same thing. Recent events demonstrated just how complex that future role may become. He was expected to safeguard the institution while protecting those closest to him. He was expected to project stability while navigating uncertainty. Most importantly, he was expected to maintain public confidence during a period when confidence itself often felt fragile. The balancing act was immense, and many observers viewed his response to the situation as an early indication of how he might lead when his moment eventually arrives. Public expectations only added to the complexity. The modern monarchy exists in a world that demands transparency while simultaneously respecting privacy. People want answers, yet they also expect compassion. They seek accountability, but they understand that certain matters remain deeply personal. Throughout this controversy, those competing expectations became impossible to separate. Every statement was measured against them. Every decision was interpreted through them. The challenge was not simply satisfying public curiosity, it was maintaining trust in an environment where information traveled faster than certainty. Underlying much of the debate was another issue that quietly surfaced again and again: unity. Throughout its history, the monarchy has relied upon an image of collective purpose and stability. When that image appears strong, confidence tends to follow. When signs of division emerge, even unintentionally, uncertainty often fills the gap. Reports of disagreements, conflicting priorities, and competing narratives, therefore, carried significance far beyond the immediate controversy. They raised broader questions about how the institution responds when confronted by difficult circumstances, and whether internal challenges can be managed without undermining public confidence. That is why stability became such a recurring theme throughout the discussion. Stability is not simply about maintaining traditions or preserving appearances. It is about providing reassurance during moments of uncertainty. It is about demonstrating that the institution remains capable of adapting to challenges without losing its sense of purpose. For many observers, the real test was never whether a controversy would emerge. Every public institution faces controversy. The true test was how that controversy would be handled and what lessons would be carried forward. The long-term implications of these events may not become fully clear for years. Yet the questions they raised are unlikely to disappear anytime soon. Conversations about leadership, trust, family, and responsibility have become deeply intertwined with public perceptions of the monarchy's future. And while commentators continue debating what happened behind palace walls, one reality remains impossible to ignore. Beneath all the headlines, speculation, and competing narratives stands a single individual whose experience has shaped every chapter of this story from the very beginning. And ultimately, the story returned to the person at the center of it all. Through every rumor, every headline, and every wave of speculation, Catherine remained the figure many supporters admired, most a symbol of resilience under extraordinary pressure. As the months unfolded and the controversy continued generating debate, one remarkable pattern became impossible to ignore. While opinions remained divided over palace dynamics, competing narratives, and the countless questions that surfaced throughout the story, public admiration for Catherine appeared not to weaken but to grow stronger. In many ways, the very challenges that threatened to define this period instead reinforced the qualities that had earned her widespread respect in the first place. Amid uncertainty, she became a symbol of steadiness. Amid speculation, she became a symbol of dignity. And amid relentless public attention, she became a reminder that resilience often reveals itself most clearly during life's most difficult chapters. What resonated with so many people was not simply her position within the monarchy, but the way she appeared to navigate extraordinary circumstances with quiet determination. Throughout the endless discussions surrounding her recovery, there was no dramatic public campaign, no attempt to dominate the narrative, and no visible effort to engage with the speculation that seemed to follow every development. Instead, reports consistently suggested a focus on healing, family, and moving forward one step at a time. In a world increasingly driven by instant reactions and constant visibility, that approach stood out. It conveyed patience in the face of pressure and strength in the face of uncertainty. Equally important was the support system surrounding her. Throughout this challenging period, William remained widely viewed as a steadfast source of support, while their children provided a reminder of what truly mattered beneath the headlines. The public often speaks about royal titles, constitutional responsibilities, and institutional expectations, yet this story repeatedly returned to something far more human: a family navigating a difficult chapter together. That reality helped many people connect with Catherine's experience on a personal level. Beyond the symbolism of the crown stood a wife, a mother, and an individual confronting challenges that no public role could entirely shield her from. The goodwill generated during this period reflected that connection. Messages of support arrived from across the world. People who had never met Catherine nevertheless felt invested in her recovery and well-being. Some admired her commitment to duty. Others respected her determination to prioritize health and family despite enormous expectations. Whatever their reasons, the response revealed a level of public affection that few controversies could diminish. If anything, the events of recent months appeared to strengthen it. Perhaps that is the most important lesson to emerge from the entire controversy. Headlines come and go. Rumors rise and fade. Debates dominate public attention before eventually giving way to new stories. Yet character often leaves the most lasting impression. Throughout this period, people witnessed not only the pressures attached to royal life, but also the personal strength required to endure them. The controversy became a story about far more than palace disagreements or competing accounts. It became a story about perseverance. Looking ahead, many of the questions raised during this chapter may never receive definitive answers. Discussions about leadership, institutional change, and royal dynamics will undoubtedly continue. New challenges will emerge. New responsibilities will arrive. The future will bring opportunities as well as obstacles. Yet if recent events demonstrated anything, it is that Catherine remains a central figure in that future, not simply because of her position within the monarchy, but because of the confidence and goodwill she continues to inspire. Whether the full truth behind the palace tensions is ever revealed or not, one thing has become clear. Catherine's greatest challenge was never the headlines themselves, it was enduring them while carrying the weight of a future crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.